Hi everyone, how's it going? So today I wanted to make a video that made the connection between Britney Spears, the militarization of society, and women's rights. So first off, let's start with Britney Spears. Now, it's come up that friends and family have been calling the police in order to intervene on her behalf because apparently she's flying off the handle and she's a danger to herself. Sound familiar? I'm willing to bet that Britney hasn't been doing any of those things and they've just been calling the police willy-nilly to get her sectioned or under conservatorship again. So that's what's been happening with Britney. First, it was fans that were apparently calling the house because they were worried that she was in danger. And now friends and family are doing the same thing, but they're concerned. These are the same friends and family that had her under conservatorship for 13 years and proved beyond all doubt that they were not equipped to look after her or judge her health. So the stories around Britney keep changing. Clearly, the mainstream media is lying so that they can continue to traffic this woman. And I don't know how she's going to get out of this. I don't know how she's going to get out of this. Apparently, Lindsay Lohan had the same thing happen to her, but she got out because she moved to another country. So a lot of people are suggesting that Britney moves somewhere else, like Canada or somewhere like that. The issue that I have is that it could lead her in a more vulnerable position than she was when she left America. But to be honest, she's a rich woman, so she could probably do what she wanted to. And then there's her husband to think about. And her husband in the first place was approved by her father. So I'm giving Sam Asghari the side eye as well, because it just doesn't seem right that this is still happening to her and she's supposed to be free. So clearly Britney, from my perspective and from what I can see, she's still being trafficked, because even after she got out of her conservatorship, there is every effort being made to prove that she should be under the same conservatorship again. So yeah, she's still being trafficked. She's still being, coerced into living a life she doesn't want to live. There is some speculation around somebody called Michael Caine, who was supposed to be the manager of Michael Jackson, up until the days that Michael Jackson died. So apparently that same guy, Michael Caine, had replaced Lou Taylor as Britney's manager. And a lot of people are kind of getting red flags from that, because I think the last client that Michael Caine had was Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson ended up dead, right? So a lot of people are worried for Britney's safety, worried that she might be offed, because quite frequently we have a lot of rich celebrities whose estates are worth more when they're dead than when they're alive. It's an unfortunate reality, but it could be possible, but I don't know. Speculation around Britney's conservatorship is one thing. Speculation around her death is another, but I'm going to keep a close eye on it, and I suggest anybody, even if you're not a fan, I suggest anybody else do the same. Because if this is the type of shit that can happen to a privileged white woman, imagine somebody who's poor. Imagine somebody who belongs to any marginalized group going through the same thing. Doesn't bear thinking about. Does not bear thinking about. All right. So I think we should keep a close eye on it for now, especially given in the past what Randy Quaid has said about star whackers. The same people that killed Keith Ledger, as aforementioned Michael Jackson. I think we can actually include Prince in that too. I think Prince was got because not only did he fight tooth and nail for the rights to his own publishing, he also spoke out against a lot of corruption going on within government and all the rest of it. So I think Prince is another one who was got. But I believe I believe there's some truth to the Star Whackers thing, and I'm kind of praying that Britney doesn't end up a victim of that. But we never know. If so many people can be so powerless against this evil, and it's happening to one of the most famous people on the planet. So again, imagine how much more common it would be for ordinary people. Speaking of which, this is where I get into women's rights, because there was this story about Una Healy from the Saturdays and David Hayes, and apparently there were rumors going around that they were a throuple, two girls and one woman, right? And apparently the rumors were true. So I was going to respond to something in the comments, but then I saw a comment by a person who said that the two girls were going to be devalued by this one man. And I'm thinking, okay, so clearly this is a troll just regurgitating the same shit for attention. But even though I knew it was a troll, it really begs the question. You've got, okay, so with women, single mothers are judged. Women over 30 are judged because they're judged to have like mileage. Anyone who has had previous contact with men, and especially more than one man, are automatically devalued. But it really begs the question, like, aren't you coming back to the issue? If a woman is devalued for the rest of her life for sleeping with one man, let alone two men, let alone three men, if she's devalued for the rest of her life for sleeping with a man, then wouldn't the man be the issue rather than her? That's the first question I had in my mind. The second question I had in my mind, or the second thought that I had, was that of this militarized culture. This is exactly why I talk about the militarization of this culture. It's actually attached to Britney in a loose way. So at the same time that Britney's trafficking is being exposed for the world to see, we've got a rollback in women's rights. We've got women being judged by their youth and how intact, so-called intact, their vagina is, and how much contact she's had with other men, right? So right around the same time that Britney is being, Britney's trafficking is being exposed, the ideals behind trafficking are slowly becoming more mainstream. Because first of all, why commodify a woman in that way in the first place? Why commodify anybody that way to begin with by saying that their previous partners devalue them? Why do that in the first place? Unless you saw that person as a commodity that you could buy and sell off your own back. Why would you do that? Second of all, why would you sleep with somebody? Why as a man would you sleep with a woman knowing that you were going to devalue her with your penis for the rest of her fucking life? Why would you do that and then turn around and say, well, you should have chosen better partners? How do you say that in the same breath? You keep pointing back to the issue. And this is where I get into the militarization of culture. This is why I'm talking about this. The culture that is being encouraged is that of one man having several women to marry or to choose from. What that leads to is that man building his own independent nation, because that's what you do when you have a family. You build an independent nation of your own. So it's slowly being encouraged for men to have as much sex with as many women as they want, whilst the women have to stay at home, care for the children. So you've got one man and a nation of children behind a harem of women. All of those families are what is known as small nations, or what I call small nations. Now, this is where militarization is key, because if you've got this culture where one man has a family with several women, and he's either married to those women or in long-term relationships with those women, then it builds a community of people that doesn't have that much protection. The militarization of society revolves around the nuclear family being encouraged, and for families ultimately to compete with one another for increasingly finite resources. And when that happens, there are clearer pipelines to psychiatry, prison, and the military. There are clearer pipelines when a culture is fostered where women are seen as breeders and family values are encouraged to the point where families are competing with one another for increasingly finite resources. So all of this stuff revolved around women's rights and revolved around how women are seen and devalued according to how many men have been encountered with her. All of that is playing into the militarization of society, and the militarization of society involves ultimately families competing with one another for finite resources. Who does that make it easier for? Really think. Who does that make it easier for? It makes it easier for defense systems who have been experimenting with small groups of people within certain neighborhoods. It makes it easier for defense systems who have been testing out their weaponry on unsuspecting citizens, small groups of citizens that are aware of their targeting. It's made it real easy for them. It's made it real easy for surveillance companies, huge surveillance companies that are testing their surveillance equipment out on small groups of people. It's made it easier for government who want to get rid of undesirables by putting them on a list and subjecting them to cruel and unusual punishment. That's who it suits. All this emphasis on family values, they're not doing it so that they can preserve children's innocence. They're not doing it so they can preserve a sense of decency. They're doing it so that they can create an environment in which men are back to competing with one another over finite resources and community. That's what they're doing this for. And if we're going to have small pockets of communities bred by these men competing with already established families and already established corporations, guess who wins? So you're going to have all these small pockets of communities built by people who have rolled human rights all the way backwards just so they can be able to use slurs and get away with it. So we're going to be these children are going to be bred by stupid men looking for vulnerable women to have children with. And then what's going to happen is that those children are going to grow up in an environment where they become worker drones, where they become workers or soldiers, or if they're particularly useless, in the psychiatric system. There is a reason why the militarization of our society is being encouraged, because there's too much wrongdoing being exposed. They have to find a way to reframe that. And remember, the targeting, the targeting that people like me are subjected to, it's not just about trafficking. And trafficking is a huge part of the militarization of society, by the way. Trafficking is a huge part of it. But it's not just trafficking. Trafficking is not the only reason that gang stalking exists. It's also social control. If you have smaller nations are going to be more easily controlled by electronic torture and cyber harassment and psychological torture. They're more likely to work on smaller communities than they are on bigger ones. That's why the isolation of nations, communities, races, sexuality, or even gender, it works for the militarization of society, because then once they get these groups separated, they can destroy those communities from within and put them in front of those and place them in the path of those three industrial complexes that I talked about before. Now, what I'm talking about is very generalized, it's very broad, and of course, the day-to-day implementations of everything that I'm talking about is a lot more complex than I've made it out to be. But that's ultimately what it boils down to. It boils down to families competing with one another, small nations being built within nations, civil war being encouraged so that they can get rid of anybody they see as the dross, and they're left with the cream of the crop. So women's rights, Britney Spears, targeting, and the militarization of society, I haven't explained it very well, but there's a tie between all of these things. You mean to tell me that the second you start exposing how psychiatric health is being used to traffic people, you mean to tell me at the same time you're exposing it being done to a famous white woman, that the ideals and the methods behind trafficking women and trafficking people in general are becoming more mainstream? You mean to tell me that right around the same time that Havana syndrome is being exposed, that the trafficking of people through the psychiatric system is being exposed, it's right around the same time that that's being exposed, that the ideals and the ethics behind that trafficking are becoming more mainstream and more accepted? Come on now. Come on now. Nothing is by accident. So they're encouraging these new generations of men to once again lay all blame at the woman's door, despite the fact that this is not, they said it themselves, it's not a woman's world, it's a man's world. It's men who created and sustained the laws that we all live by now. It's men rolling the rights back of women. It's not women doing it, it's men doing it. And yet we're still catching heat as the so-called commodities. We're still catching heat for what our buyers or people who wish to be our buyers are actually doing. So yeah, that's how it's all connected. Because how are you going to expose, again, I'm not going to repeat myself, but you can see how it's all connected. Talking about a woman is devalued by, the amount of people that she sleeps with. Like, that's trafficking. That's trafficking. Human beings have sex. They're supposed to have sex. What are you talking about? Devalued. And then there is, and it hasn't been lost on me. It has not been lost on me that there are people within the New Age community espousing this shit. So men are supposed to be the protectors and the provider. No, the man is your pimp. If he is not emotionally supporting you, if he is not treating you like a human being, if he is not doing his share, if he is treating you like an afterthought, if he is treating you as if your time is not valuable and all he brings to the table is money and being able to beat up other men, he is a pimp. Understand that. And everything, all the values that are being espoused about women, it comes back to treating women as commodities. And again, there are people in the New Age community that see all the talking points that I'm talking about as, woke nonsense or feminist. No, bitch. No. The big three religions of the world, the god of the big three religions of the world originally came from a storm god, a war god. I thought it was a sky god at first, but I think the sky god is El. But Yahweh or Yahweh, they're actually a storm war god. All the god of all the biggest three religions are literally a Hebrew god of war. A Hebrew god of war. Look at the Bible, look at the Quran, look at the Torah. All the laws and regulations within those books are based within a militarized society. Look at them real carefully now. And you've got that same militarization that is coming back in vogue now. Do you understand? It's coming back to that situation where abusiveness and espousing these trafficking values are mistaken for the truth. It's not the truth, it's just abusive bullshit. And when it comes to trafficking or the trafficking of human beings, of course, race comes into it. And of course, there is this really harmful dichotomy between those who are desired and those who are undesired. The undesired are, of course, brutalized more. They're brutalized more and brutalized quicker. And this is something that we should never take for granted. But the desired are also desired for as long as they fulfill a fantasy of power. The desired are only valued as much as they can bring a feeling of power and stability to the person that is consuming their company or their bodies or their time. So it doesn't free anybody. It doesn't free anybody. So yeah, the connection between Britney Spears, women's rights and the militarization of society is that ultimately it comes down to using the military, psychiatric, and prison pipelines in order to have more slaves, to create things fit for consumption. If we're going to have wars happen, and we're going to have more resources, then we need to have people in the world who will do the bidding of powerful people without question. And that's what all of this is about. And if you can't think critically enough to think, maybe I'm the one devaluing people, not just with my opinions, but with my presence. If you don't have the intelligence or the wherewithal to think of that, and you're going around having kids, then that's not going to lead to a good place. In the first place, I believe, from a spiritual perspective, that when people like that have children, I used to think that people like that having children was a detriment to humanity, but now I'm changing my mind about it. I feel like the reason why inherently selfish, narcissistic people end up having kids is because they're supposed to learn to be less narcissistic, to actually care about something beyond themselves. But it seems like a lot of people who have kids do not learn that lesson. And especially when they subscribe to the same ideals and beliefs and ideologies that are literally attributed to a fucking war god, and that enable the prison, military, and psychiatric industrial complexes. There are less smart people having kids and more people who believe in the stupidity of commodifying women and animalizing men. There are more and more people like that having kids rather than people who are using their brain having kids. What is that going to lead to? What does that lead to? It leads to people being drones and competing with technology in order to be useful and losing. And education, the fact that education is through the roof in terms of expenses, that plays into it too. You keep people uneducated, it makes it easier for them to go through the psychiatric and prison and military industrial pipelines, especially if being in the military might pave the way for someone to get an education. So what you're able to learn and what you're able to do in this life, it will come down directly to how useful people are to families that have already established their power. And all the competing that these families are going to be forced to do for one another. It's like a fucking real life version of Survivor, only with more blood. So yeah. Yeah, so like it seems like it's, or none of it is connected, but it is. And you'll see as reality continues to unfold. So yeah. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Yeah, and as for the targeting community, that's basically what targeting was always about. It wasn't just about the trafficking, which is already bad enough, but it's also about smoothing the path for, you know, the prison, psychiatric, and military industrial complexes to breed more slaves ultimately. To breed more slaves to work and consume and die without question. Of course, again, the way I've explained it simplifies it, but the general gist of it is that. So yeah, if you're you know, treating, if women are too busy thinking about youth and beauty and the intactness of their vag to really consider what's going on, and if men are too focused on, you know, on anger as a form of expression, you know, and we get those elements together having kids, then again, what happens? I mean, I'm just saying, there's not enough critical thinkers having kids, but they're not having kids because they're critical thinkers. You know what I mean? If you're already thinking critically about how the world works, why would you need to have kids? So that they can teach you something, so that they can teach you to be less selfish. You're already being less selfish, spiritually speaking. So, yeah, that about sums it up. And once again, it's going to be future generations picking up the mess of the older ones. God help us all. Anyway, I gotta go. And yeah, that about sums it up. Bye.